Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to have an in-depth look at PolyDamage, which is an add-on for Blender that helps you to add wear and tear to your objects. Originally I wanted to do a comparison between PolyDamage and OCD, also known as one-click damage, which seems to be the more popular add-on for this kind of thing. But honestly, I can't really recommend OCD. I have both. And compared to PolyDamage, OCD is clunky, slow, it gives me a lot of Python errors, and it is by far not as flexible as PolyDamage as far as the creation of damage is concerned. The only advantage of OCD for me over PolyDamage is the fact that OCD can automatically create two materials for your object, one for the damaged parts of the object and a second one for the parts of the object that have not been damaged. However, with PolyDamage, we can use a workaround using a free add-on called Forgotten Tools. I will explain all of the settings of PolyDamage to you, and I will also share some tips and tricks as far as the creation of damage is concerned and how we can exercise more control over the result that we get. In the video description you will find links to both OCD and PolyDamage. If you want to, you can check them out and decide for yourself which one you would prefer. In the video description you will also find links to two free add-ons that I will be using in this video. One is the free version of Bagapie and the other one is Forgotten Tools. I have split this video into two main parts. The first one is about creating a brick wall using the free version of Bagapie, and the rest of the video will be about PolyDamage. I have subdivided that second section into further subsections, and I have put timestamps in the video description so you can jump to the section that you want to watch. You can also jump to the different video sections right at the bottom of this video. So, without further ado, let's get started and have a closer look at PolyDamage. I'm going to use the free version of Bagapie to create the brick wall. I'll put a link to the add-on in the video description. In order to create the brick wall, I'm going to need two objects. One is a circle curve. I'm going to set this to 3D and make it a little bit smaller. And then I also need a brick, and I'm going to use a cube for that. Let's open the end panel, go to the item tab. I'm going to use realistic dimensions for the brick. Let's do 30 by 15 by 13 maybe. And we also need to apply the scale. Control A and apply scale. And let's hide the end panel. And now I'm going to select the brick and the curve needs to be the active object. And then we can use the J key to open the Bagapie menu. All we need here is the array options, and I'll start with a circle array here. Over here on the operator panel we have our settings. And by default, use constant distance is checked. What this does is it prevents overlapping of the geometry depending on the constant distance you set here. So if I reduce that, you can see we get more bricks, but once you reach the distance of 0.37 here, you can't add any more bricks and thus prevent overlapping of the geometry. However, for what we're going to do, we need to switch that off. I'm going to change the count to 4 for now, and I'm also going to change the radius and make it smaller, and I'm going to line the center of the bricks up with that circle curve here. You can see that the bricks are oriented the wrong way. There's a couple of ways we can change that. One would be to use the rotation settings here. We could change the Z value to 0.5 and this will rotate the bricks the right way. What we could also do is tab into edit mode, make sure that all of the faces are selected, and then we can rotate those around 90 degrees. And you can see we've lost the operator panel, but Bagapie is non-destructive, and we can go to the end panel and go to the Bagapie tab here, and we can still change everything. So let's increase the count here to 13 for now. And you can see that we start to get overlapping geometry on the inside here, but we have huge gaps on the outside. In order to change that, I'm going back into edit mode, hit Shift and Z to go to transparent mode, and I'm going to select the verts over here, switch back to solid mode. And now I can scale these vertices on the y-axis, like so. I'll try to make these edges here parallel, and now we can increase the count. And let's see, I'm going to scale these a little bit more. Let's do something like this. And on the outside, we're okay. So that looks fine. And that is our first array here. We also need an array along the z-axis, but before we can do that, we need to apply the present array modifier. When you use Bagapie, you don't want to apply your modifiers in the modifier properties. What happens if I do that is that all the objects will disappear. So let's go back a step and hit the check mark here on the Bagapie tab to apply the array modifier. And I'm going to use Bagapie again, and this time we need a line array. And let's change the relative offset to 0 on the x-axis and make it 1 on the y-axis. And if we wanted to, we could go into edit mode, select all of the vertices here, and for example scale them on the z-axis, and everything will still fit nicely together here. I'll just undo that, go back to object mode. Bagapie offers quite a few options to randomize the creation of those bricks. Unfortunately, we can't use them here, but what we can do is randomize the rotation on the z-axis. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll offset these bricks about 50%, like so, and then we can add a couple more rows and play around with the rotation to get what we want. And this is a little bit fiddly. What we could also do is just create 2 rows of bricks, offset them approximately 50%, then apply the array modifier and add a new one, again a line array modifier here. And let's increase the count to 3. Everything's offset perfectly. So let's go ahead and apply this array modifier, and I'll get rid of the top row. I don't want to create too much geometry here. So what I'll do here is I'll select the top row of faces, hit Ctrl+ twice, and then X and delete those faces. And there we go, that's our finished brick wall. And now we can go ahead and use PolyDamage to apply damage to those bricks. After installation, you can find PolyDamage on the end panel. It has its own tab here. And here we have all of the settings of PolyDamage. At the bottom we have an info drop down, and here you can see where the add-on can be bought. There is a video on YouTube which is not very helpful. There is no documentation for this add-on, and considering that this add-on costs $19, the complete lack of a proper documentation is not exactly a plus in my book. That said, PolyDamage is easy enough to use. However, if you don't know what these settings do and how they interact with each other, your results will probably be a bit random. I will try and give you a couple of tips on how to use PolyDamage and gain more control over the damage that you create with the add-on. Above the info drop-down we have the apply damage button, and this obviously is the button you will use to apply damage. Whenever you make a change to any of these settings, you need to hit the apply damage button again in order to see the result. Unlike OCD, PolyDamage has no real-time update, which in my opinion is not a disadvantage, because especially if you have a number of objects selected and apply damage to those objects, real-time update will slow things down considerably. Next we have the remove damage button here, so whatever damage you apply, you can always remove with this button here. And that doesn't just go for the present session. You can open this file at any time in the future and you will still be able to remove the damage. Like OCD, PolyDamage seems to do something to the object data, which means that with the damage applied, this is not going to be your typical Blender mesh. I even tried to export a damaged object as OBJ and FBX, and even after I re-imported those objects, PolyDamage and OCD as well, by the way, still recognize the damage, and you can remove the damage or override the existing damage with new settings here. You can't layer damage on top of each other, so you can only apply damage to the object once, and then you can only remove it or change the settings and apply a different kind of damage. But like the real-time update, I don't think this is a disadvantage, because the damage you can create with PolyDamage is so versatile and flexible, you won't really need different layers of damage. Next, we have a list of the selected objects, which honestly is not very useful, especially if you have a lot of objects selected. This is not like a drop-down or anything, and I don't really see the point of this list here. With the Reset Settings button, we can reset all of the settings here at once. You can also right-click on any of the settings and reset this particular one to the default value. With PolyDamage, you can apply damage to a single object or to multiple objects. The only advantage OCD or one-click damage has over PolyDamage is that it can create materials for you. One for the damaged parts and one for the parts that have not been damaged. Unfortunately, you can't do that with PolyDamage. However, there is a workaround for that, using a free add-on called Forgotten Tools. The option that we can use in Forgotten Tools is the selection sets, which let you store selections. And if you want to create two materials for the damaged objects with PolyDamage, we need to make a selection first or store a selection first. And it is best to do this as long as this is still a single object. I will put a link to Forgotten Tools in the video description. It's really useful. Go and get it. The selection sets are the best selection storage options you can get in Blender. I've had a look at a couple of other add-ons that let you store selections, and Forgotten Tools is still the best one. I use Forgotten Tools all the time, especially the selection sets, so I was very happy to hear that it has been updated recently and is now working properly in Blender 3. In order to use Forgotten Tools, we need to tab into Edit Mode, and my end panel is a bit of a mess, as you can see. Let's see, the Forgotten Tools should be right under the View tab. So this is the View tab, and it's the tab below. And here at the bottom you can see the Forgotten Tools and the selection sets. These are part of the Forgotten Tools, but they have their own drop-down menu here. I'm going to select all the faces here and create a selection for all of these. And once we've done that, we can hit the P key and select Separate by Loose Parts. So now we have individual bricks. I'll just tab back into Object Mode. And to make things a little bit easier for me, I'm going to use Pivot Transform and move the object origins of all of these bricks to the bottom and to the center of each of these bricks. I'm also going to hide that circle here. We don't need that. So I'll grab one of these bricks. Let's go back to the PolyDamage tab here, and let's talk about the seed. By default, random seed is checked, which means every time you hit the Apply Damage button, irrespective of whether or not you make changes to the other settings here, a different seed will be created. So I can hit Apply again and again, and each time I will get a slightly different look. I'll just reset everything. If you switch that off, you can also manually change the seed, but every time you will need to hit the Apply Damage button in order to see the result. One way to work with PolyDamage is to adjust the settings, apply the damage with the seed or the random seed, and make further adjustments to the settings. And once you're fairly happy with that, you can use that, or you can switch on random seed and try to get different looks if you want to. Random seed does one more thing. I'll just remove the damage from this brick here, and I'm going to select a couple of those bricks. Let's reset everything. And watch the seed number here. If I hit Apply Damage, you can see the seed number changes, which means that if you have this checked, a random seed will be created for each of those bricks. And you can use that to further randomize the look of your damage. However, just using the seed and applying the damage will also result in bricks that look different. Maybe not as much as when you use the random seed option, but as you can see, none of these bricks look exactly the same. Let's remove the damage and have a look at the settings at the top here. The settings are split into 3 sections. One is the resolution. The next one is the control for the edges of your object. And in the bottom section here, we have all the noise options. Despite the fact that PolyDamage only has one noise, I find it much more flexible than OCD, for example. You can easily create everything from subtle damage to very heavy damage with PolyDamage. And this, for me, is one of the big advantages over OCD. So let's have a look at how these settings work. At the top, we have the resolution, which by default is set to 64. And that actually is a pretty useful preset. In many cases, that will be sufficient to create the damage that you want and get a good looking result. 64 is a good compromise between calculation time and the detail you can get at this resolution. So let's go ahead and apply damage. Actually, I'm just going to use a single brick for that to make things a little bit faster. So you can see this is not looking too bad. We can go as low as 16, which is a resolution I never really use because it's not really looking very good. The minimum I'm using is a 32. However, the resolution you pick will depend a lot on the other settings that you have. If, for example, the resolution is very low, but you have set the other parameters to create very much detail, you won't be able to see that detail because you don't have the resolution to display that. You can increase the resolution to insane numbers, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it because Blender will freeze at some point. I'm not sure why there is no limitation for the resolution because it doesn't make sense to make it that high. For example, 800 is way too high. What I tried in my tests is 128 and 256, which is a lot slower but still doable. In this case, we don't really see an effect. In fact, it returns to basically an undamaged brick. Let me just test that. The reason we're getting this result is because the resolution is too high and the other settings we have don't really allow for the detail to be displayed. Basically, we don't have enough detail for this resolution here. You can also crank this up to 256. And at 128 and 256, even for a single object, as you can see, this takes a long time. And as you can see, there's no real change here. So we've just wasted a lot of time and polygons and we didn't get a really good result. I tested the resolution with different settings and what I found is that at a resolution of 128, it takes about 6 to 8 minutes to calculate the damage for all of these bricks here. But that always depends on how much detail you want to display, so it can take longer. In any case, you usually don't need to go to a resolution of 256, for example, is very high. I just reset everything to the default and remove the damage. And let's have a look at the next section here, which is edge relax and edge push. And these settings kind of work like control edges in subdivision surface modeling, meaning that in this section you can define how much the object holds its shape. So if I apply damage, let's bring the resolution down a bit, and I'm going to apply the damage again. Maybe switch off the overlays again. So for example, edge relax will drop the edges down and edge push will push them back up. If I switch off edge push completely and apply the damage, the object will basically collapse. So you need to balance these settings in order to get the result that you want. Edge push ranges from 0 to 1. Edge relax, you can increase that from 0 to any number you want, basically. I'll set this back to the default here. Now if I set edge push to 1 and apply the damage, you can see we'll get very subtle damage on the edges here. Making small changes to these settings can have a big effect, so there's no need usually to go to extremes. I'm just doing this in this video to get my point across. I'm going to set this back to more or less the default, maybe change the edge relax to 2 and let's apply the damage here. I'll go back to 64. So you can see, depending on the resolution you set, you get a very different result here, because now we're able to display a lot more detail. So that's what Edge Relax and Edge Push do. In the third section here, we have the noise settings. By default, the noise scale is set to 40, which is not a lot of detail, and this is the result that we get. The lower the noise scale, the more detail you can display. However, the detail that you get will also depend on the resolution. So if I increase the resolution to 128, the damage will probably look a little bit better and more detailed. Of course, we'll also create a lot more polygons here. And if I set this to a very high number, let's try twice the default here, you can see we'll get something that looks very soft. So the resolution is basically wasted. We don't have the detail for the resolution to work the way we want it to. And of course, we're still creating a ton of polygons which basically don't do anything. So you always need to balance out the settings and make sure to set everything correctly in order to get the effect that you want. I'll just reset this to the default. Next we have the noise strength. The noise strength works in connection with the noise contrast. By default, noise contrast is set to 1. If I decrease the noise strength to 0 and apply the damage, we will get a very soft looking object, and I've set the resolution way too high for this. So I'll bring this back down to 64, because again, this is a total waste of polygons. You can see we've created a ton of polygons, but they don't do anything. And as soon as I increase the noise strength, we will start to see an effect of the noise contrast and get more details. I'll reset this to the default again. As you can see, the damage we create is basically limited to the edges of the object. If we want damage on the sides of this brick as well, we need to increase the noise contrast. So this setting here is responsible for damage on the sides of the object as well. If I increase that and apply the damage, you can see we will get more details on the sides as well, and also the noise will eat a lot more into the object. How this looks will also depend on the resolution. So for example, if I increase the resolution here to 128, and I also need to decrease the noise scale because it's quite high right now. Let's do something like 20 and apply the damage again. Well, in this case, we get a lot of holes in the object. That is sometimes what happens. Usually all it takes to fix this is to change any of the settings just a little bit and apply the damage again. And there we go. So you can see the damage now looks a lot better. Why? Because for one thing, we've increased the resolution and we also decreased the noise scale. And now we are able to display the damage on the side of this object with the noise contrast. And if I bring this down a little bit, we can make this a little more subtle. Okay, so this doesn't look too bad. And as you can see, the creation of damage is fairly easy, provided that you know what these settings do and how they depend on each other. There's two more things I want to do before I finish this video, and one is I want to do a test regarding the speed using all of the objects here. And then of course we need to create a second selection and apply textures to the damaged parts and the parts that are not damaged. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll just reset everything. I'll use pretty moderate settings here just to make things a lot faster for this video. So let's say I want to bring down the edge relax to 2. That's probably going to look a little bit better. So that's some moderate damage that calculates pretty quickly. Now let's go ahead and apply this damage to all of those bricks. I'm going to select everything and hit the apply damage button. And as you can see, with a resolution of 32, that actually goes pretty quickly. And we're getting a nice look without too much work here. Let's remove the damage. Of course, at a resolution of 16, the damage will be created even faster. Now here you can see we have one object that doesn't look too good. I would select this separately and just change any of the settings here and apply damage to this object again. Let's just select everything, remove the damage, and let's try this at a resolution of 64. And maybe I'll switch that to wireframe. just so we can see the creation of the damage a little bit better here. And this is still acceptable. It is a lot slower already, as you can see, and it will probably be even slower if you decrease the noise scale and add more detail. But still, at 64, that's not too bad. And looking good. But of course, as you can see, we now have 257,000 faces. But that's the price you pay for detail like this. By the way, the reason why I didn't create this brick wall with curved surfaces is because the damage we create, as you can see, will also create a ton of n-gons. Which means that if you have a curved surface here, you will get pinching and shading issues and all sorts of problems. Let me just remove the damage. And let's do one more test. This will probably take a couple of minutes. I won't make you watch it. I'll just pause the video. Let's try 128 and see what happens. And this is still kind of acceptable, but it will take a bit. So here we are. This took about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And it was probably not worth it. Why? Because my noise scale is a bit high, so we can't really display all the detail that we have defined by the other settings here. So that's probably a waste of time and polygons. Let's see how many faces we have. You can see we're getting close to 1 million now. And like I said, in this case, I didn't choose the settings wisely in order to get a good result. I mean, the bricks look okay, but it's way too high poly and it took way too long to calculate. You can also see we have a couple of objects that have holes in them, and I would select those and just change any of the settings here. Let's change the resolution and apply damage again, and that fixes that brick. And let's use the same settings on this one and maybe on these two as well. Okay, I'm not going to test this at 256 because the calculation time would probably be 3 times, 4 times as long as with a resolution of 128. I'm going to remove the damage, well, from all of the bricks and reset everything to default, switch off the random seed here, and I'll change the resolution to 32, edge relax to maybe 1.5, and let's do low poly damage for these bricks here. That will be really fast. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you is how to create those materials for the damaged parts and for the parts that have not been damaged. The best way to create these materials is to join all of these objects back into a single object with Ctrl J. And I'll just reset the pivot to the center and the bottom of this object here. And now what I'm going to do is tab into edit mode and go to my selection sets here, and we can recall the selection, as you can see, and now we can hit Ctrl I to invert the selection and create a new selection set here. And now what we can do is go to the material properties, and I'm going to create 2 new materials. And let's change one to this color here, and the other one I'll make a bluish color just so we can see the contrast a little bit better. And I'm going to assign this material, or rather this selection, to the bottom material here, and then I'm going to recall the first selection, select my first material here and click the assign button. And if I go to my material preview, you can see that the materials for the different selections have been created and applied. I hope you found this video useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.